floor is yours.
Thank you, David. So, it's always difficult to get the attention of people right after lunch when everybody is going down for a while. But I hope we will catch up with that because there is some riveting remarks on the study that need to be discussed. Of course, we started off yesterday with our discussions, and maybe some of the recommendations from session 1 are proved now or should be amended a little bit. However, it is my task to bring to your attention what really were the recommendations. As you might remember, we had 2 parts of the discussion. The first part dealt with the general remarks on the advisory checklist. And there is altogether 15 bullet points that I would like to raise. First one is we had a discussion on whether to link the advisory checklist to solve the current financial crisis or not. And I guess during the discussion it came out that it should be something that has to be linked to the financial crisis somehow. The second point is that from the point of view of the construction sector, that the role of this construction sector on the way out of the crisis should be considered in this study. And that is obviously a shortcoming that has not been addressed so far. The third point dealt with national guidelines that need to be in place, and that came from the point of view of urban planning. And what we do not need, as our Italian colleague pointed out, are scattered regulations at regional or local level. The sentence was, good governance needs rules. And at that point it was stressed that principle 4 of the advisory checklist is of particular importance to the study. Next was that the format of the document as such is very good, but on the other hand, it's a very ambitious task to deal with all the factors and influences raised in the paper in depth. So it was discussed whether to focus more on the financial crisis and on the risks coming along with real estate and financing real estate, and maybe to not repeat things that are already in place. At that point, we discussed that credit rating is something that really needs to be explored in depth. And this is something, again, which we had not done before. Next was that we had to take into consideration markets other than sales and mortgages that need to be highlighted. For instance, the rental markets that came up several times. And I'm looking at Wendy Thomas. She added that the issue of data and technology is a critical one that needs to be highlighted as well in the study. We should take care of different stages of development of the real estate markets and address those particular points relevant to those stages. So we have developed emerging and informal land markets, and there is particular circumstances in each of those environments that need to be clearly addressed. It was stressed by the participants here that we will need more time for comments and probably a public consultation or a blog, as Brian put it, for comments on each principle probably would be quite useful. We have decided to have an initial period of 2 weeks' time to raise comments from this audience and to send those comments to Giampiero Bambagioni, who is the major author of the guidelines, for improvement. We found out that there is a critical borderline between guidelines and political statements, and that we should steer clear of political statements, but should stick to guidelines and not draft any sort of declaration. It was clear at that point, and I think this was proved today, has been proved today, that Principle 9 on social housing is a crucial one, and it needs to be revised and even expanded a little bit. We should put more emphasis on the introduction to the principles. That was one of the results yesterday as well. Should put in a little bit more into this introduction and give more input on what we are currently dealing with before addressing the different principles. It came up that a glossary should be a good idea, a glossary of terms with definition of those terms. It came up at several points, be it the term cadastre, be it territorial planning, or whatever. It was suggested to add best practice examples to those guidelines, which I think is a good idea for getting deeper into the issue. It is an issue that there might be some quarrels between the seek for transparency and the seek of, even the seek of opaqueness of that market, of different shareholders in the market, and somehow that should be tackled as well. So competition is an issue, obviously, if we're talking about transparency. We should explain the risks of the real estate market. That was, again, concluded. And it was finally concluded, coming to the general remarks, that a new Principle 11 on consumer education should be introduced. And that were more or less the general remarks. And if I'm coming to the details, then I will be very brief, don't worry. I don't want to expand that for an hour. I will give all those remarks to Giampiero so he can take care of that. For Principle 1, it should give more concrete advice. There should be a definition of the term public real estate. We should investigate into the role of rural land markets, and again, best practice examples were considered useful for that principle. In Principle 2, we need to discuss the role of public notaries in depth, their role in the security of transactions, and again, that was the remark from the Agenzia del Territorio, that we need a glossary with a clear definition of terms. Unified real estate cadastre is one example. Principle 3, in the principle itself, there were two words, also depends, that are not correct, and it was agreed that a new sentence needs to be found for Principle 3. And what is in Principle 3 concerning capacity building and vocational training should be shifted to Principle 10. Principle 4, again, is very important. It could go further in depth, and it should also include issues of rural land management, not just urban. And Principle 5, well, there is only one in number 10. Restitution issues should not hold up the registration process. That's something I do not clearly understand what is meant by that. Maybe that could be clarified, because if there is no owner, I can't register one. And Principle 6, that was a very short one. Just it was suggested to add that there should be incentives for young couples to build their own houses and homes, and probably incentives given by the state. Principle 7 is a very controversial one. We had Jonathan Harris on one side who said that it is not relevant to those guidelines and that it should either be deleted or merged with another principle, whereas other participants stated that Principle 7 is very important. Anyway, Giampiero, I guess we have to think about Principle 7. Principle 8, rating agencies, they're mentioned here. It was agreed that they do not belong to Principle 8 and transparency. So bullet point number 3 should be deleted here. Principle 9, we've heard a lot of it about today, about the need to integrate different other social programs into that principle and deal with different income groups. That should be important. We should expand on rental markets, and even in the introductory speech of Mr. Gobbi of the Bank of Italy, it was stated that Principle 9 should be amended. In Principle 10, number 7 should be rephrased. and it was mentioned that education of consumers is important. In the principle itself, there is a word called subjects, and that should be changed to parties. That was what it was agreed. And in the meanwhile, I've got from our Canadian colleague, as he promised, the new Principle 11. He formulated it. And I don't read the bullet points beneath it. He gave them as well. But the principle itself is to promote the interests of real estate consumers. Consumer education is essential for a more innovative and productive real estate economy. Very easy, with a number of bullet points below it. Well, that was, I hope, within my 10 minutes, all from session 1. And as you have realized at the one or the other point, the discussions have gone further in the meanwhile, over those 2 days. But I think there is still a number of issues that is still true and that should find its way to the guidelines. Thank you.